Hey everyone, Nick Engvall here. Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you about some of the people that make the sneaker history community and this podcast possible. It's more important than ever to think about who you give your money to when you're buying clothing to go with your kicks. Our friends at Guilty Goods started their brand with a goal of giving back, especially to the communities that make sneaker culture possible. With every purchase from Guilty Goods, at least 10% of the proceeds are donated to organizations like Big Brothers and Big Sisters, the Susan G. Komen Foundation, the Movement for Black Lives, and many more. You can save 30% on your order by using the code HISTORY at guiltygoods.us. Again, that's history at guiltygoods.us for 30% off, and you can feel good about your purchase knowing you're supporting a meaningful cause. Sneakers are all about presentation, and if you're like me, displaying your kicks at home or in the office is just as important as when they're on your feet. Sneaker Throne makes sneaker display cases featuring customizable LED lights, drop-side cases to showcase the entire side of the shoe, not just the heel or the toe, the whole shoe. They've also got display cases for trading card collectors and hat collectors. To me, it's the perfect way to display your collection. You can save at least 10% on your Sneaker Throne order by using the code HISTORY at sneakerthrone.com. That's history at sneakerthrone.com. If you're a Patreon supporter or a member of our Discord community, you already know about Kicks with V hot sauce and his small batch, locally sourced hot sauce. V has been one of the biggest supporters of sneaker history and the podcast since the early days. He's currently the defending champion in our community trivia nights competition. Kicks with V hot sauce has been a huge hit with the community. You can save 10% on your order by using the code SneakerHistory10 at kickswithvhots.com. That's SneakerHistory10 at kickswithvhots.com. Now, you're probably here because you like sneakers, and if you join the Discord, you know our community is about so much more than that. Whether it's the marathon-like community calls, trivia night debates, the in-person meetups, or just sharing our favorite experiences, we found that although we have such different backgrounds, we all have some unexpected shared passions. Not only does the entire community look out for each other when it comes to releases, we're like a support group for life in general. You can join the Discord community for free by heading to the show notes of this episode. After you're done listening to this episode, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a simple compliment can take you, and we all know how good it feels to have someone show their appreciation. Now let's get into today's episode. What up, what up? Welcome back to the Sneaker History Podcast. Hey, before we get into this episode, I wanted to tell you about a couple of our partners. These are some of the folks that help us keep the podcast going, and they've been nice enough to offer some exclusive discounts for our listeners. Now, if you've watched us on YouTube, you all know how we love to display our kicks when we're not rocking them. Sneaker Throne makes sneaker display cases featuring customizable LED lights, drop-side cases to showcase your entire shoe, not just the heel, not just the toe, shoe trees, a number of other sneaker-related accessories. You can save 10% on your Sneaker Throne order by using the code HISTORY. You can find a link to Sneaker Throne in the description, or you can just head to sneakerhistory.com/sneakerthrone and it will send you directly to their site. Again, that's 10% off with the code HISTORY. Our friends at Prospect are the premier streetwear brand and sneaker boutique based in sunny San Diego, California. One of my favorite places. Prospect is not your typical hypebeast haven, though. They carry classic footwear from brands like Asics, New Balance, Puma, Saucony, as well as local and globally known streetwear brands like Belief, Illust, Rottweiler, Stussy, and many others. Not to mention their own Prospect label and the iconic Just a Kid from Dago collection. If you're a listener of the podcast, you can save 10% on all of your orders from Prospect through their website with the code HISTORY10. That's promo code HISTORY10 at PRSPCTSD.com. If you or someone you know is interested in sponsoring the podcast or becoming a partner with our community, get in touch with us. You can reach us by email at podcast@sneakerhistory.com, and we'll get back to you with information about how we can partner. And now for today's episode.
Jordan trying to shake off Starks. Oh, what a move by Jordan! LeBron James with no regard for human life. 12 seconds. Bryant for the win. Iverson against Gill. The crowd on its feet. Allen for the win.
Welcome to the Sneaker History Podcast.
Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm sure I botched that order, but nevertheless, it's another Friday where we're going to go through the Sneaker History Book Club. Today I have the illustrious Matt Sullivan, author of Can't Knock the Hustle, Inside the Season of Protest, Pandemic, Progress with the Brooklyn Nets, Superstars of Tomorrow. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And as is sneaker history tradition, and I think we heard through the grapevine you're a sneakerhead, so we have a segment in our episodes called What Are You Rocking and What Are You Copping? So if you don't mind sharing with us, what are you rocking or what have you rocked in the last couple of days, and what are you hoping to cop in the near future?
I got the Union 4s here.
Okay.
Somehow won the raffle straight through Union. I had nightmare of getting the shipping here that involves several neighbors from my old place and matching billing addresses. So I'm happy to finally be rocking them. Of course, I stained them the first day I did get them, so I'm suffering, but cleaning at the same time. A tough life, I know. And this morning I entered what will be certainly one of many future failed drawings and raffles for the new Fragment Travis Lowe's, which I don't even want to imagine how much they're going to cost at resale, let alone how many bots have already begun to infiltrate Travis's site. So we'll see. The worst case for me is always copping some Travis merch. I wear my Cactus Jack shorts almost every day, and I think I got a backpack coming again with some shipping nightmare to come because it takes like 3 months for them to even send anything in the mail these days.
No, that's what I was reading, because a couple of our listeners who are on our Patreon were lamenting something similar because they got access to the website, and some of them even bought, I think it was a Fragment and
The highs, yeah.
Yeah, and they were just saying, yeah, this is not for another 5 weeks we're going to get this. So I was like, man, as an old, in this case, because this is the first artist in my lifetime that I'm like, I really respect what he's doing. I just don't get into it, so I just let the kids rock, so to speak. But it is something to be said that he is kind of inspiring this post-Yeezy run in terms of athletic footwear. So good on you. Best of luck. We'll send you some of our good vibes as well.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed indeed. So we wanted to first get into this book, and the first thing I wanted to chat with you specifically about is one of the opening scenes in the book. And it's at a Nets press conference, and I think everybody's just shooting the breeze or the shit, depending on where you are. And you're kind of talking to KD about the fact that this is a different type of book. So I was hoping if you could go into what you initially meant with that statement and then cover some of your background, because it is truly fascinating compared to the average sports writer that we see usually associated with this type of book.
Yeah, I think I was actually complimenting his Travis Lowe's at the time. He was changing out of his KDs, throwing on like a Balenciaga hoodie and spraying his sponsored deodorant, which had kind of been the only thing in his locker room all year. And he was finally starting to show up. This is right before the pandemic hits in earnest. And he kind of scared a lot of the other sports writers, like when he did show up. But I had been to his crib and kind of been around him. And I think it was clear from his teammates' perspective, who'd been around more than his Achilles injured season, that I didn't really consider myself an expert in X's and O's and didn't want this book to be about that at all. I mean, if you read it in 350 odd pages, there's really not a lot of on-court action, save for the occasional, Kyrie, LeBron stare down or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then I got to talking to KD about how so many of his teammates were talking politics in the other corner of the room, how Kyrie was one of the most misunderstood athletes since Kaepernick, which he agreed with, and how I said, no offense, but I don't really care about your on-the-court stuff. I mean, this team has so many, I think the phrase Renaissance men is kind of thrown around a little too jargony, but just interesting human beings, smart guys who represent a lot of the vanguard of where we've come, kind of in the footsteps of LeBron over the last 10 years, which my book also traces. It's not just an embed with the Nets. It's about the rise of player empowerment and hoops culture, sneaker culture, what have you. And KD and I got to talking about how a police killing had almost, a protest had almost shut down a game for another one of his teammates a couple of years earlier. So a lot of this had eerie kind of presaging of what would come in the months ahead, and the history book I sort of fell into. So that was kind of my deal with the Nets, with the players, was that I'm not here to do what your average sports player does, and I've done a lot of more serious journalism in my career, and I think that ingratiated me to them a little, but not just as a reporter, but kind of as an intellectual peer.
Yep. And I kind of wanted to give your other non-basketball related work a plug as well, because I got to some of it and I thought it was very fascinating. And I think the biggest thing for me was you oversaw the investigation of every police killing in America. Was that over a duration in time, or could you talk a little bit about that? Because I know so much of this book deals with that off-the-court stuff that you had mentioned.
Yeah, so I started my career at Esquire magazine. We did a little bit of sports, but really got into politics on the reg. And then at the Atlantic, I oversaw breaking news from Boston bombing to Sandy Hook, and the New York Times. I did a lot of stuff on opinion and across all the spectrum. And then when I was a top editor at The Guardian, I did a lot of work in the aftermath of Ferguson. And then we realized that every police killing wasn't really being tracked by the government, and so we launched a 2-year investigation into every face, every circumstance, and followed it up. And over the course of those years, and then in my reporting for this book, just met so many mothers of the movement who'd lost far too many future hoopers to gun violence and police violence. And so that's something I was interested in. I think it's something that the NBA has been at the forefront of really pushing and learning how to be, maybe not advocates, maybe not activists, but something in between. And so to be able to speak to the mothers of Samaria Rice, who's Tamir Rice's mom, and what LeBron didn't do when this young 12-year-old boy was killed for carrying a toy gun in a playground miles from the Cavs arena. And I think looking at the voices of the voiceless and the mothers of the movement, not just the celebrity voices, is something I really tried to give equal weight to in this book. You'll see, and even in the first chapter, I interviewed the head of Instagram about Kyrie's influence versus Donald Trump. And then 2 paragraphs later, there's the 7th grader on Kyrie's old middle school team saying, I love all Kyrie's IG posts, even the weird ones. So I think that's kind of the balance of this book that makes it not just your average sports book.
So thank you for using that quote, because that was something I was going to ask you about. So seamless transition here. You mentioned that because I think Kyrie Irving is, in the best way imaginable, the poster boy for this golden era of mental health talks, because we're so used to, prior to this century, we just treat our athletes like superhuman robots, and we kind of see it with the Simone Biles twisties controversy, and I use that term very loosely because it's not a controversy. She has a better understanding of that job than any of us will ever do, so we have to support her. But yeah, you mentioned the fact that, okay, Kyrie's posts are inspiring, even the weird ones. Shout out to, I think, the random 7th grader, but it was a contrast to what I remember Kyrie kind of saying. He almost kind of hates the showmanship of the game, which is interesting because he's probably one of the most preeminent dribblers of all time. And there is a certain quality to Kyrie where he's kind of been dubbed the enigma of the century by some of his teammates. Other people say he's misunderstood and very passionate. Talk to me about Kyrie, because you're also a Blue Devil, much like Kyrie. Did you have any preconceptions of him coming into the story, and did any of that change, and if so, how?
I tried to go in knowing that Kyrie had been made into a villain by the NBA media. He's an easy target because he pushes buttons, because he considers himself to be an intellectual, and he had been pushing buttons in a out there way, a heady kind of flat earther way, but he'd come kind of almost full circle, if you will, to really considering himself to be not just a kind of secret humanitarian, but a public advocate for entertainers and athletes as having a day job and then having an influence beyond that. I think he's a relatively young man, he'd be the first to say, in terms of being a man, not just an quote-unquote aging hooper, but he's finding himself. And I knew that I would be there for an important part of that journey as he sought his roots, grew up a Nets fan, and sought to flex his influence in political ways without maybe getting too political. But this season that I followed, you'll remember it started with this Daryl Morey controversy in China. And, LeBron got a lot of flack for kind of pushing the silence and not wanting to talk foreign policy. I mean, Kyrie was in there saying, what the fuck are we still doing here? And I think there's a lot of that stuff that was building up behind the scenes with Kyrie that ended up showing itself in the aftermath of the George Floyd protests, in the aftermath of the death of Breonna Taylor. And this is a guy who bought a house or put a down payment on most of the house for the family of George Floyd. And I think that's the type of stuff he does every day behind the scenes that he gets almost no credit for. I think he's starting to accept the shine a little more without thumping his chest about it. And I hope that, between this book and some of the clarity that he's bringing to his beyond the court mission in the months and seasons to come, that he'll start to be seen as not a Kaepernick figure, but I think get that 2, 3, 4, 5 years later shine where everyone agrees, okay, this is a guy we can all agree upon. He's not polarizing. He's about unity. And while he's still weird and goes off on tangents and pushes some of the wrong buttons, I think it's better to have a button pusher than not.
Absolutely. And it's I also appreciate the fact that I guess Kyrie has slowly transitioned from the Curb Your Enthusiasm Ted Danson anonymous donator to the Larry David slightly more public. And it's funny we kind of mention Kyrie and his experiences because I think this week is as good of a week to kind of look at those buttons that he pushes, but also the humanitarian efforts, because we see the controversy with Nike. I mean, we are a sneaker podcast, so I'm sure if we haven't already, we're going to have more episodes discussing the whole discourse of that. But then you see the work with the Pani Project and something that I believe he's building a water purification system for villages in Pakistan. And as an Indian, that kind of prides me in a way because Pani is literally the Hindi word for water, and just seeing that cultural awareness that we don't necessarily see. Because to your point, much like his idol and his teacher, Kobe Bryant, especially near the end of his life, we would hear these anecdotes about Kobe being this generous guy and buying people houses or attending certain events unannounced and just kind of raising people's spirits. I think I see something similar with Kyrie because a lot of the other subplots of your book that I really found fascinating was the Kobe-Kyrie relationship, because in a sense, I think Kobe really wanted a pupil other than his daughter, because obviously that's the natural pupil he's going to get. And fortunately, we couldn't get to see the fruits of that labor because they were both taken away from us so early. But Kyrie really was his star student, and it was something that the anecdotes or the passages that you would have where they're having the communication between one another, and Kobe is getting peppered by Kyrie about all these questions, and you could sense that Kobe is happy with that, because I think that's the type of people Kobe would have wanted if he was in Kyrie's spot. And for me, the ultimate kind of pinnacle of that relationship is, unfortunately, at the funeral itself, we have all these people kind of waxing poetic about Kobe, and rightfully so. But I thought the most important thing was Kyrie taking some time with Team Mamba, right? Because you had mentioned he actually just took them aside.
Yeah, it was kind of like the Oscars of basketball. I don't think there have been that many GOATs in one arena at the same time, maybe ever. And there's a part of the tunnel near the exit of Staples Center where a lot of these super A-listers were mingling and catching up. And Kyrie just walked up the staircase to the sidewalk of downtown LA and just was there for the girls of Team Mamba. They were on something like their 10th memorial service in a row. And he just said, I'm here. I'm here to pick up that torch. And it was meaningful to him. It still is. Just like he's got some parts of his spirit in him that he wants to kind of paint on this canvas, not just the fear is not real, beautiful mind mood board on his office wall in his place, but painting that canvas with Nike. And when he as he was rediscovering his Sioux roots and the controversy over Standing Rock, he made sure there was a shoe there. As he was learning about the pay disparity, wage gap with the WNBA, and really standing up for women and his black queens and Breonna Taylor, he made sure to empower his sister, who was an influencer and a stylist, but handing over a shoe to her. And so I think that's why it struck me as a little odd that this latest mini controversy, off-the-cuff comment section, IG war with Nike cropped up, because in speaking with Kai's sneaker designer, Ben Nothingham at Nike, who's been with him throughout the Kyrie's kind of explosion as a mainstream multicolorway international profit driver for Nike, Ben said he wanted to pick up the mantle of Kobe. He said, after having all these kind of off the court friendly, SpongeBob, very accessible shoes to everyone from my toddler daughter to grandfathers in India or what have you. And so he said, according to Ben, the master has gone that route. Speaking of a more performance shoe, I'm going to take on that torch and carry that shit. 7, 8, 9s, we're going to focus on that and honor the legacy of Kobe. And so that was a shift. As soon as Kobe passed, Kyrie wanted to paint that canvas of a more performance shoe. Had a little to do with Kyrie's kind of injury history and learning about wearing a more performance shoe himself. And so I think that was an instance of Kyrie really pushing Nike and them listening to him and re-engineering a shoe. Obviously, is a long process. And so for him to come out and say that the 8s had nothing to do with him, that struck me as very off base for the way that Nike listens to talent, the way that Nike has always really listened to Kyrie. And Kyrie himself, not just some boardroom full of execs who used to sit in his living room. There's an instance where Kyrie was sitting around back in, I believe it was Boston, and some of the design folks, some of the Nike suits were kind of talking to Kyrie's suits, his agent, what have you. And Kyrie's like, yo, this is my shoe. Talk to me. And so he is a creator, a writer, designer, all this heady stuff that he considers himself to be. So maybe some of that push in himself that is pushing the league, that is pushing player empowerment to kind of be this, well, we are the league, we take the power back, we are bigger than the Nike superstructure because we run it. That's in him. Whether the particulars of him exactly not being involved in the design and marketing process are accurate is another example of Kyrie maybe not being as clear as he wants to be while having the right side of history within him.
Yep. It's funny you mentioned Ben. He is actually one of my groomsmen and a close friend, and this is the first shoe that he kind of pointed to me when we started seeing that influence of the Kobe Kyrie thing. So that Mamba mentality for me is probably one of the best Kyrie sneakers ever. So that bond has always been there. And it's funny you mentioned that about Kyrie because I couldn't help but think, given the circumstances of another case in the court of public opinion where we kind of had this dissolution between the Bryant estate and Nike, I'm wondering, is this Kobe kind of channeling his homage, lack of a better term, and granted this is just speculation from an armchair psychologist like me, of like trying to be his inner Mamba some more? Because so much of Kobe's reputation was, hey, we take this back if it's not good. And that's kind of what the interpretation I got reading that message was. Something was fundamentally off, and I'm in agreement with you, and I'll use this platform to kind of amplify that same sentiment, is he can't not state that statement because there is a relationship there. I've heard it from friends because I've been able to be friends with those designers, but at the same time, I know enough about the industry. So it was a very unique way of expressing himself, and I really want to see what comes out of it because, to your point, all the Nike Kyrie shoes, especially the 4, 5, 6 starting on, was a trilogy. And to your point, the 7, 8, 9 is going to be that next trilogy. And you can already kind of feel the performance shifting because, as you had alluded to, Kyrie has probably done as great of a job connecting to women and young athletes that I don't think I've seen with a Nike line, except for maybe Kobe. And even that was some of Kobe's earlier stuff with the 4s and 5s in particular. So fascinating stuff there. I wanted to use this opportunity to transition to Kyrie's teammate KD. And if you don't mind me asking, what makes him so fascinating as a protagonist? Because I was kind of doing a mental checklist in my head, and this is the 5th book that has KD at the focal point of the plot. What were your dealings with him? Because the impression that I got reading your book was he is very much his, Twitter bio, where he's him, he's going to do him, and he's going to chill. And I'm wondering, why can't we take that man at his word in this sense?
That's what I try to do, is not read too much into who is Kevin Durant or what are his politics. And he says he's a hooper, and that's what he is. He likes to do him, and he does chill. He certainly chills. And I think it's the spirit of someone who has been on this, overwrought, over-reported quest searching for something. And I tried to find out what that was and, stumbled into some interesting reporting with Steve Kerr and what have you. But I think it's really the product of someone who's somewhat exhausted. If you think about it, he's been on the road since he was a kid. And, I remember being at several of his high schools back in PG County and across that region. And his coach at this little school, still kind of rusty old school called National Christian, where, they don't have a weight room, they don't really have a three-point line. It's kind of crappy rubber gym. They're all sharing one big leg boot. And the coach was remembering when KD kind of swooped in and swooped out. And it was that simple. He said, I'm sponsored by Adidas. He's with Nike. Nike done figured out that he's really good. It's a wrap. And so KD up and goes to Oak Hill. And he's in the middle of nowhere. And then he'd already committed to Texas. No surprise there, so to speak. And, he came back to prove himself at Montrose Christian and in Maryland. And so I think he was always searching there. But at the same time, it's a business, right? And I think his mentor, godfather, longtime coach back at the, again, crappy old rec center in PG County, which KD's fixed up and helped with the weight room a little bit. This guy's name's Stink Think
Yes.
Brown, and he calls it, his phrase is, quote, the circuit board, which, he kind of describes as, families are plugged in. You go into the Nike socket or you go into the Three Stripes socket, right? And this is like when you're early teen. And at that point, 14 years old or so, Stink said of KD, he realized at that point there's a business. It is a business. And if you think about it, KD is kind of the last all-star of that one-and-done era. And so he's kind of accidentally leading this generation where, like, the enterprises are built around you and there's bagmen and all this, rather than the next generation, which I think he's probably inspired with his empowered authenticity, what have you, to be able to have the Jalen Greens, John Kumingas of the world who, sure, they are wrapped up in Adidas, Nike, what have you, but they also got paid on their own terms. They are swaggy enough to be themselves and not, consumed by the Houston Rockets, by even the Dubs. And so I think it's really interesting to see how those guys follow in the footsteps of what KD has done after what LeBron has done. And sure, KD is enthralled to the 11-year, $300 million deal he's got with Nike to, he's been with that as part of his family all the way through. But he's himself, and he's able to do that, I think, because of the cushion and the burden of the circuit board.
Yeah, and thank you for going into the circuit board. It was probably my favorite chapter in your book. And yeah, it's one of those things where we kind of see it kind of spoken about in hushed terms in like early movies like Hoop Dreams, but we are living in that era of transparency, and if there's anything that's kind of shrouded behind a veil, nope, not going to happen, because people are going to want to push and they're going to want to know the full aspect of what it is that they're getting themselves into. And to your point as well, KD's got this influence because he's so unique on the court that I think it is going to be very hard to see the next KD. And subconsciously, or maybe he is a little more conscious, especially considering his boardroom projects, he is doing that part in shaping that next generation. And I think it's fascinating because obviously we talked a little bit about the Kyrie-Kobe relationship. KD kind of had his own Yoda in a sense, and that was another fantastic relationship you explored in the book. So I was wondering if you could kind of go into who Yoda is and kind of what sort of, I don't want to use the term closure because I think that's too powerful of a statement, but KD is almost soothed by Yoda in this sense because he gets this empathy that, okay, this guy's kind of gone through the wars like I'm going through the wars.
You'll remember that Kevin Durant and some old hipster named Steve Nash used to play together as peers. And so there was this assistant coach in OKC. Well, he was actually a trainer in OKC, and KD kind of helped him get a job as a coach in OKC named Adam Harrington, great guy who is now conveniently also a coach in Brooklyn.
How did these things work out this way, Matt?
Well, he got to Brooklyn before KD, but they're boys. Anyway, Adam hooked up KD and Nash at some workouts in LA, then some more workouts after Steve retired. And it's kind of a joke. KD refers to him as Yoda without aging Steve too much. But there was this year when Steve Kerr hired Steve Nash to be a kind of pseudo glorified assistant, more like a consultant who would come in when he was in town or could make it up to the Bay. And players I've talked to love Steve in that room. He's just so agreeable, again, kind of almost as a peer more than a management figure. And I worked with Steve briefly at Bleacher Report. Such an approachable dude, just kind of totally on the level with everyone from, the 22-year-old sneakerheads at Bleacher Report to the suits at Turner. And it was interesting that I thought that KD was open eventually about saying that he consulted Steve before he made the decision to go from OKC to the Bay. That in that before Nash was a consultant, Nash was a consultant in the Bay before KD got there, and he thought, KD thought he'd made up his mind, and Nash knew that KD was on this kind of search and internal quest as a man, and he told KD that, if you don't do this, if you don't make this jump, as much of a, almost sellout move as it may have seemed, and still seems to a lot of people, he would lose the opportunity for what Nash said to be in, quote, complete control, which I think is a huge point of my entire book, of the entire existence of a superstar. And Katie joked, like, okay, well, when you're in town in the Bay, like, Yoda's got to come to me first, right? Gotta, then you can coach the other guys. Kind of joking again, but like he said, like, other than that, he was down. And then, quote, it's not about championships. KD said that he told Nash, this is about challenging myself. And so I think that begins to describe this nebulous journey of Kevin Durant and why it's brought him almost sort of a kind of GPS toward Brooklyn with Steve at the helm.
Yeah, and I think kind of as a closing note, that Nash relationship kind of outlines some really interesting points to me, because I think the billion-dollar question with KD has always been, what is he searching for? And we have to be kind of comfortable with the fact that only he knows, and we can't try to populate what we think. So the complete control line was kind of a revelation for me. One thing that I also found interesting was in page 88 of the book, and I remember because it kind of knocked me back, was the fact that he goes, I miss being young. And to your point about Kyrie earlier, where like these guys are young as it is in the grand scheme of things, but there is that innocence where I think KD was almost born 10 years too late, because I could see him thrive in the previous Jordan era. And hell, we even got the quote, and this is probably the most Michael Jordan sentence ever, that he did a sit-down interview with Cigar Aficionado, and he was talking about the fact that, hey, I can't play in this current era because there's just no concept of privacy. And I think KD would have been one of those guys that, yes, he truly is one of those players that can be plugged and played into any era, but from a just mental relaxation point of view, I think he should have probably been in a previous era, because I think he's done a great job of handling the scrutiny, as good of a job as you can do as somebody that's so engrossed by the concept of Twitter. But yeah, there are times where I don't know the man. I probably will never meet him. I do worry about the fact that he is got this perception now where he's constantly on the phone and
but at the same time, I think the Achilles year, the pandemic year, gave him a sense of freedom to not just be in the gym all the time, not just to be in a hotel room here. He's never really had he's had a brief marriage, but never had a chance to have a girlfriend or just, be him and chill at length. And I think he was able to find himself, maybe that just meant that he wanted to be a champion in addition to an entrepreneur or what have you. At the same time, that pandemic year empowered other players in different ways, right? You've got Kyrie now leading an almost activist brand of player empowerment to challenge kind of the very superstructures that pay his bills. And whereas Jordan said Republicans buy sneakers too, Kyrie probably thinks he could start up a Nike of his own. I actually think it's interesting. I talked to a lot of kind of OGs of activism and empowered players who weren't at nearly the LeBron level. And I had a really interesting conversation with Craig Hodges. You'll remember he's a guy who went to the White House and a dashiki and was just kind of a rebel, before social media. And he was on the bus when Jordan said Republicans buy sneakers too. He told me that he kind of gave Jordan shit, come on, man. But he also had been in Jordan's ear about maybe ditching Nike and forming his own black-owned apparel sneaker business in Chicago, which I thought... it was a very Kyrie idea. And there's a lot of that spirit of Craig back in the day pushing MJ that I saw a lot this week in Kyrie pushing back on the gram. And so there's a lot of these foundations of player empowerment that have been there for quite some time, from the MJ generation to now and going forward, that I think we just, we don't want to read too much into them, but there are, as Kobe would say, breadcrumbs that have been left by stars all along.
Absolutely, and we definitely love a good Easter egg now because it allows us to tap into our imagination. I'm going to use the Craig Hodges suggestion to transition to another player that we didn't realize probably how sorely he was missed until we saw Brooklyn lose to the Milwaukee Bucks this year. But Spencer Dinwiddie, talk to us about him, because he truly is the underdog disruptor, as the chapter in your book kind of calls him out. He is fascinating, and there was two things in particular that famous, ubiquitous Jay-Z lyric about I'm not a businessman, I'm a business comma man, which we get thrown out so frequently. But Spencer Dinwiddie really is about that life. And then also the Dr. Heisenberg quote, where he realizes that he can be the spark that eventually changes the mind. He has this concept of being a support player on the court, but I think reading your book, he was also that guy off the court as well for guys like Kyrie and KD, because he's so unique in terms of how he thinks.
Look, I think Spencer knows exactly how to leverage NBA Twitter the NBA culture to his own personal brand's advantage. I mean, you see him joking around in the media about how he deserves a $125 million contract right now, and he knows how to launch his new Creator Galaxy app at the exact right time. He is one of us, and yet he is sort of using us, which, all due respect to Spence for being that non-LeBron to use the system to his own advantage while still being a mellow, humble, self-deprecating, funny guy. I mean, you'll remember that he had that year where he tried to make 82 shoes, like one for every single night. Now, people forget that he had a Kaepernick shoe, a Muhammad Ali shoe, Rosa Parks. Right? It was really interesting, and he had to fight back. And I remember him saying at the time, if my name was James Harden, this would be the biggest story in the NBA. And so he had that chip on his shoulder. But I think he and a wave of people who maybe, again, at the time were kind of got a lot of shade thrown at them, or here today, gone tomorrow. I mean, he was in that spirit of LeVar Ball, right? Who had these, overpriced, kind of broken-ass kicks for his kids. But, LaMelo has had his own signature shoe, owns part of a team down under or in New Zealand, and I don't know. That's what I call those underdog disruptors. These guys who aren't afraid to push the boundaries of what the NBA will and won't let you do. Like Spencer's out here trying to quote unquote IPO his own contract, and he's taking me inside these meetings with he's got an army of lawyers going up against the kind of nerdy lawyers called in white shoe lawyers from the NBA, and he's not afraid to push those boundaries, even if it's having some GoFundMe to pay for his fans, choose where he's going next. I mean, again, pushing buttons, but in a truly entrepreneurial, almost nerdy kind of way, which I think, again, will be at the vanguard of having guys come after him who are already asking him about how do I IPO my own contract on Bitcoin. And I think he does that front-facing. What he does behind the scenes is be a counsel. And again, he and Kyrie had a better relationship dating back to All-Star appearances, and they attended briefly the same Harvard Business School seminar, and they were pals, and I think Spencer's been open about recruiting Kyrie. I think he's also was open to me about Kyrie maybe, showing him where the door was, maybe not pushing him out of it. I think I have every expectation that Spencer will be out of Brooklyn for next season, and again, using that platform, using his place in the starting lineup to become both a public entrepreneur and a private counsel to whichever star he undoubtedly attaches himself to in the next season.
Yeah, he's very much a digital consigliere for a lot of these guys.
For sure.
And similar to what you had mentioned about Craig Hodges, and the other player that kind of gets referenced a lot in your book is Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. I think we're going to feel his impact long after the game, and it won't even be about the game. It's just the game got him to our collective attentions, and that's where Spencer Dinwiddie starts hustling again. One other player that I wanted to just kind of have a quick conversation about was the president, a.k.a. Garrett Temple. And I know that one of the talking points that I had got when I'd received your book was talking about how LeBron is fully willing and able not to just be an owner, but possibly be the president. Could you kind of compare and contrast them? Because I think you have obviously LeBron James, the star of all stars on this stratosphere up here. But Garrett Temple is kind of going, lack of a better term, the Obama route, where I could see him start off as a city councilman member and kind of work his way up and have a journeyman-like career in politics. Or is there something more?
I think he's considering it. I think it was really cool to be in this movie theater between where he and I used to live in Brooklyn, where he was hosting a screening of Just Mercy, the film
Michael
about
B.
exactly, and talking about how that story of a kind of hero lawyer had led him to pick up the idea of going to law school himself. So in that kind of pandemic bubble period, he was studying for the LSATs. And, he took me back that night after the movie theater to his place, and we talked politics. And I think he's not some intricate legislative head, but he knows how to navigate celebrity and practicality. He's definitely someone who sees the middle road rather than the activist road. He's about action, which a lot of guys say. I think he's actually the type of guy who would talk to the city council, who would talk to the activists, who did talk to the activists when he was the guy who, when he was on the Kings, almost had that protest after the tragic death of Stephon Clark at the hands of the police, almost shut down his game. And he was the one calling over the activists at the end of the game and talking for like an hour to talk about solutions in the community and all that difficult work of progress that Obama talks about, that the NBA likes to talk about, but Garrett is that guy who wants to take it down to local level. So his family more than jokes that he could be the governor of Louisiana someday, which is where he's from. I don't think that's that far out of reach. I think Garrett understands that his education in influence in politics, in activism, in advocacy will take time. And again, these guys are young men, and I think Garrett would probably be pretty happy being a GM someday, which is one path these guys can go down. And
Yes.
LeBron's, KD's probably owners someday, and I think that will show the reflection of where this player empowerment era reshapes front offices and the idea of control at a management level. I think it'll be interesting to see where celebrities end up in the halls of power, whether they are pulling the strings or influencing the strings behind the scenes on more than the gram.
Excellent. So that is it. We've got time for one more question, and we kind of talked about some pseudo-heavy stuff, so I figured we'll let you go on a light one. So one of the details in the book is the fact that the New Jersey, wow, I'm showing my age, the Brooklyn Nets player thread is named Death Row, and there's this
their group chat.
Yeah, the group chat, and its connotation, rather, of it's us against the world. So as soon as I read that, my natural mental image went through the infamous Vibe cover where you saw the four faces kind of put in directions of a compass. And I was like, oh, I wonder who Matt thinks is the Suge Knight, the Tupac, the KD, and the Dr. Dre of the Nets. So, Matt, if you don't mind, just as many of these as you want to talk through, go for it. And that will end the episode after, so...
I think it's pretty obvious that if there is a Tupac of the NBA, it is Kyrie Irving.
Yes.
I think off the I do me and I chill and certainly the blazing route, I think KD and Snoop have more than a thing or two in common. Also very good self-branders without having to do much of the work to get paid for it. I think DeAndre Jordan is kind of the class clown and enforcer in terms of protecting his guys from outside noise, and so maybe he's got a little Suge vibes, but with a smile. I don't know if there's a Dr. Dre of the Brooklyn Nets. I don't know if there's a Dr. Dre of the NBA who is at once a creative force and a dominant businessman. I mean, I don't think LeBron. I think LeBron's on some super status that is beyond what Dre is to the music and culture game. So Dre is a singular character, with obviously a dark side as well. I don't know. I think the Nets, had their own big three coming out, and I'm not sure James Harden is much of a maestro beyond the court. And so I think you got 3 out of the 4 on that Vibe cover inside my book, and maybe the Dre is yet to reveal himself.
Actually, it's eerie because I was kind of thinking the same thing. So thank you again for your time, Matt. Where can people follow you or find you on social media?
You can follow me on social at Sulduggery, a very bad pun I'm stuck with as my handle for a long time, SULLDUGGERY on Twitter and the gram. And the best place to pick up Can't Knock the Hustle is at my publisher's website, the HarperCollins website, which is hc.com/thehustle. And that's where you can get it from big box shops to your local independent booksellers, which we should support more than ever.
Yep. So with that, I want to thank you again for your time. This is me, Rohit, signing off from yet another episode of Sneaker History, and we look forward to hearing about what you do on and off the court. So thanks again, Matt.
Thanks, man.
Hey everyone, this is Nick again. Before you take off, I wanted to thank you for listening to the Sneaker History Podcast. We just launched our new merch, including tees, stickers, keychains, and a bunch of other pieces you can grab to show your support for the podcast. You can purchase it now through our companion site, sittingtreasure.com. You can also get access to more episodes of the podcast by joining our Discord community at patreon.com/sneakerhistory. Plus, we've got a bunch of other fun things going on in the community, including trivia nights, giveaways, access to sneaker raffles from around the world, release announcements, and my favorite, just good people helping good people get the sneakers they want. Plus, we're not bought by advertisers, investors, or other big money. I'm confident in saying this is the best sneaker community I've ever been a part of. We've also teamed up with a few partners to offer our supporters discounts. You can find some in the links for this episode and even more in our Discord. Give us a try, and if you don't enjoy it, you can always cancel the membership at any time. Last but not least, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a simple compliment can take you, and we all know how good it feels to be on the receiving end of someone showing appreciation. Thank you all for the support, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace. Hey everyone, this is Nick again. Before you take off, do us a solid and head over to Apple Podcasts to leave us a review. Give us a rating on Spotify and Amazon Music, and make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel because we have even more video content coming soon. Speaking of new content, we have an amazing community of sneaker enthusiasts that hang out in our Sneaker History Discord on a daily basis. While sneakers is a connection point that brought us all together, we've all discovered countless shared passions that we have in common with each other. We recently launched a couple of new podcasts directly from our community. One of them is a Formula One podcast. If you're an F1 fan like me, the Exhaust Notes podcast is your weekly fix of Formula One fun. It's hosted by myself, Rohit Malhotra, and Todd Yates. New episodes drop every Tuesday. I've been wearing fitted hats for years and collecting my favorite teams since I was a little leaguer. It has been awesome to see so many new fans getting into fitteds in recent years. Crown and Stitch is our new talk show about fitted hats with Dexter, Keith, and myself, where we talk about fitted hats, snapbacks, throw in some obscure hats because we all kind of like some funky stuff once in a while, don't we? Copping, collecting, and so much more. New episodes drop every Wednesday. Hit the links in the show notes for this episode to give our new shows a listen, and be on the lookout for more new podcasts dropping soon. Last but not least, tell someone you like their kicks today. You never know how far a simple compliment can take you, and we all know how good it feels to have someone show their appreciation. Thank you all for the support, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.